He never planned to meet her that day. It just happened the way some things do without reason or warning. His alien friend had called that morning with a voice too calm to sound normal and asked if he could come over after school. Nothing strange about that except the quiet between words, a kind of pause that made his skin feel like it was waiting for something to start. He said sure, of course, pretending he did not hear the hesitation, and when the call ended he sat there staring at the screen as if it would explain what that silence meant. The walk to his friend's house was not long, but it always felt longer than it should, as if space stretched for them alone. The air had a shimmer that day like heat on asphalt, even though the season was wrong for it. Leaves had started to fall, and the smell of them carried a soft sadness that clung to his clothes. He thought about how his friend never seemed cold, no matter the weather, and how his footsteps made no sound on the ground, and for some reason that memory felt heavier now. He kept telling himself it was fine, this a visit, just being polite, but there was something about the word mother that caught him. It felt too human, too simple, for whatever his friend truly was. He remembered the time he saw a flicker under his friend's skin like a light trying to hide, and wondered if the same light lived behind the eyes of this mother he was about to meet. When he turned the last corner, the house appeared. It always did. That suddenly, as if it was not there until he looked for it. Its walls glowed faintly, not bright, but alive, like the sky before lightning. He blinked and it seemed smaller, then bigger, then smaller again, and he decided not to blink anymore. He told himself it was a trick of light reflection, something explainable, though he never found the right word for what kind of light it was. As he got closer, he noticed the yard was too quiet, not a bird, not a breeze, just stillness so complete he could hear his own pulse in his ears. He hesitated at the gate because for a moment it felt warm against his hand like skin, and when he let go it left a faint pattern on his palm, almost like veins. But he shook his head and laughed softly because that was ridiculous. He walked up the path and tried to breathe evenly, but every step felt measured, like he was being watched. Maybe not by eyes, but by the house itself. The door opened before he could knock, and he froze because he hadn't seen anyone touch it. The hallway behind was dim but soft, with a light that did not seem to come from any bulb or candle, and in that doorway stood his alien friend, smiling with that same quiet smile that never reached the eyes, the one that always looked practiced, like something borrowed. "She's been asking about you," the friend said, his voice kind and distant at once, like a dream already fading. "She wants to meet you finally," and he nodded, though he didn't know why. His chest felt tight and his throat dry. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with a sigh that sounded almost alive. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered, or maybe it had never been this long before. The walls on either side pulsed faintly as if they were breathing, slow and patient, and the air carried a sound too low to be a hum, almost like the vibration of something buried beneath the floor. He tried to ignore it, but each step made the floor shift slightly under his weight, like walking across a sleeping creature that did not want to be disturbed. He kept glancing toward his friend for reassurance, but the friend only walked ahead, calm, unhurried, and silent, except for that almost smile that seemed glued to his face. He noticed how the light inside the house never stayed the same color. It slid from pale blue to honey gold to something silver and sharp that made his eyes ache, and whenever he blinked he could swear the furniture had moved slightly closer to him. Chairs tilted a fraction inward, rugs no longer quite where they had been. He wondered if his mind was playing tricks, but the air itself felt aware, thick with something that listened when he thought. Too loud. They passed a mirror that did not show his reflection. At first he thought it was just old glass, warped or dusty, but then he realized it showed the hallway empty except for his alien friend walking alone, his own figure missing completely, as if the house had already decided he did not belong in its world. He looked away, pretending not to notice, though his stomach twisted with the effort to keep walking. The scent in the air changed. It was not food or flowers or anything he could name, more like a memory that tried to smell real. He thought of sunlight through a window on a day that never happened, and the more he breathed it in, the more he felt like he was forgetting where he came from, like he was being rewritten from the inside out. They stopped in front of a doorway that shimmered softly like the surface of water, but not water, something thinner, clearer. He could see movement beyond it, not shapes exactly, but impressions of shapes, as if shadows had learned to mimic people. His friend turned to him and said, "She's waiting," then stepped through the shimmering space, disappearing into a glow that folded around him like silk and vanished. He stood there alone for a moment, wondering if he should follow. He thought of turning back, of finding the front door again and stepping outside to the safe, cool air of the ordinary world, but the hallway behind him looked different now. narrower, darker, longer, like it wanted him to stay. Like it was swallowing distance. He took a deep breath that did not feel like his and stepped through the doorway. The surface rippled, cold and alive against his skin for a second. He could not see anything, just light and motion and a sound like distant rain falling on metal. Then the glow dimmed and he was standing in another room. The room was circular with walls that curved gently upward like the inside of a shell, and the air shimmered with faint lines of color that moved. When he did, there were no windows, but he could sense the night outside pressing softly against the house, trying to look in and failing. Somewhere beyond that soft hum continued the one he had heard since stepping inside, now clearer and now closer. He felt a pull in his chest, as if the room recognized him, as if it had been waiting for him for a very long time. And then he heard her voice, calling his name from the far end of the room, low and melodic, the sound of something both beautiful and wrong, and he realized she already knew him before they had ever met. She stood at the far end of the room, and for a moment he thought she was standing still, but then he realized she was moving so slowly that his eyes could not catch the motion. It was like watching the tide rise, grain by grain, her figure shaping itself out of the light around her until she became clear enough to look almost human, though not quite. Her height shifted slightly, as if she could not decide how tall she wanted to be, and her skin carried a faint shimmer like the surface of a bubble right before it burst. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made him feel like she was reading every thought he had before he even had. I wanted to speak, to say something polite, maybe even friendly, but his throat refused. The air inside the room felt too thick, too alive. His alien friend stood beside her now, and there was a strange pride in his expression, a quiet certainty that this moment mattered more than anything else that had ever happened between them. She said his name again, and this time her voice felt closer, though her lips barely moved. The sound filled the space, wrapping around him, soft and warm and heavy like fog. He noticed her eyes then, and realized they were not eyes in the way he understood them. They were deep, reflective pools of shifting color, each one holding motion like storm clouds rolling through water. They were beautiful but wrong, because they seemed to show him things that were not there. His childhood bedroom, a bus stop in the rain, a hospital room he had never been in, and through it all her gaze stayed gentle, calm, unblinking, as if she were watching the story of his life unfold inside her. She stepped closer, and the floor beneath her feet did not creak or bend. It simply accepted her weight, like the house itself was welcoming her back. She reached out a hand, thin, delicate, too long in the fingers, and the skin glowed faintly as if light were flowing through it. Instead of blood, he hesitated, but she smiled again, and the hesitation melted, not because he trusted her, but because it felt impossible to resist something that already seemed to know him completely. When she spoke again, she asked questions that made no sense but felt true, questions that landed in his mind like stones dropped into deep water. She asked if he still heard the hum in his sleep, if the stars ever whispered his name, if he remembered the first time he saw the sky move. He wanted to say no, he wanted to ask what she meant, but the words stayed trapped somewhere behind his teeth. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to something far away, and for a second he thought he could hear it, to a faint echo like music being played backwards, slow and sad and endless. His alien friend stood still, watching both of them, and there was something in his face that looked almost human, a flicker of worry maybe, or guilt, but it vanished too fast to be sure. Then she laughed softly, a sound like glass touched by wind, and said, "You have been expected for a long time." He tried to smile, though his hands trembled, because something about the word expected felt the final too heavy, like a door closing behind him. Before he had even walked through it, the room began to breathe around him. Or maybe it had always been breathing, and he had only just noticed now. The walls pulsed faintly, as if a heartbeat echoed through the structure. Slow, steady, ancient. His alien friend stood beside the mother, watching quietly, his expression unreadable, like a reflection that had learned to stay still. She gestured toward the curved walls and said softly, "You are safe here." Though the way she said it made the word safe sound like a shape he did not recognize. He looked around and realized there were no corners anywhere in the room, no edges, nothing that defined where one wall ended and another began. Everything was smooth, continuous, flowing like the inside of something alive. Light drifted from the ceiling in ribbons, not quite beams, not quite mist, and when it touched his skin, it felt cool first, then warm, then cool again, as if it were learning how to comfort him. She told him to sit, and a seat rose from the floor, as if the house had simply grown it for him. He sat slowly, expecting it to feel strange, but it molded perfectly to his shape, soft and firm at once, too perfect, almost knowing, and the thought that it might actually know scent. A quiet shiver down his spine. She asked if he was comfortable, and though he nodded, the word yes got lost before it reached his mouth. Her eyes glowed faintly now, the same silver blue as the air itself, shifting every time she blinked, though he could not remember her actually blinking. The hum he had heard since entering the house grew clearer. Now it had rhythm, not music exactly, but something close, like a heartbeat layered with whispers. The kind that hide between thoughts. He tried to focus on it, but every time he did, the sound seemed to move away, just out of reach. She watched him closely, studying the smallest movements of his face, as if his confusion were a kind of conversation she could understand. Then she smiled again, and the walls responded. The light around them pulsed brighter for a moment, like the whole house had exhaled. In agreement, his alien friend finally spoke, saying, "My mother listens to everything, even the silence. She understands things people forget to say." The mother turned toward him and said, "Silence is honest, that is why it is rare." Her words fell gently into him, but the meaning pressed hard behind his ribs. He noticed something shifting on the far side of the room. What looked like a window began to form from the wall, bending outward until a clear oval of light opened onto what should have been the yard. But there was no yard outside, only a vast black sky filled with stars moving far too fast, streaks of light twisting like threads being woven by invisible hands. He blinked and the image rippled, the stars folding back into the wall like they had never been there at all. The mother placed her hand on his shoulder, and it felt like being touched by warmth that carried weight. It was not pain, but awareness, every nerve waking at once. She said, "You are seeing the house the way it remembers itself." He wanted to ask what that meant, but the words died before they left his mouth, because suddenly he felt the pulse again, stronger, closer, and realized it was not the house beating, it was him. She looked at him with the kind of stillness that made sound fade, her gaze soft but endless, and he felt the question forming before she spoke. It was not spoken out loud, not exactly, more like it bloomed inside his head, and the meaning settled there like dust on glass. She asked him about the day he first met her son, about the exact color of the sky, the sound of the wind, the way the air felt against his skin, and he realized he could not remember any of those things clearly. He tried to answer anyway, but the words tangled before leaving his lips, as if his memories refused to be touched. She tilted her head slowly, eyes flickering with thin waves of light that shifted from violet to deep green, then to a color his mind could not hold, and she smiled again, not cruelly but knowingly, and said, "Memories change when they are watched." He wanted to ask her how she knew that, but then she asked about his dreams, the ones he had before he knew her son, the ones with the stairs that never ended, and the window that opened onto a sky full of hands. He froze, because she could not have known about that. No one could have known about that. His alien friend stood quietly at her side, not looking at him anymore, just staring at the wall, like there was something written there, something that was waiting for the right moment to move. He wanted to speak to him, to ask what was happening, but the friend's shape seemed to waver slightly around the edges like light caught in water, and for a moment he thought he saw another face flicker underneath. Not a human one, but something older, something patient. The mother continued speaking softly, almost kindly, asking questions that pressed deeper than memory. "How did it feel when you first realized the stars were watching you?" she asked. "And do you still hear them calling your name when you are alone?" He shook his head too quickly, said no, too firmly, but even as he said it, a part of him remembered nights, lying awake, hearing a faint hum in the dark that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. She stepped closer, and the air shifted around her. Her presence carried warmth that seemed to bend space slightly. Everything tilted toward her as though she was the center of gravity. Her voice was barely sound now, more like thought, brushing against thought, and every word she spoke painted pictures behind his eyes. He saw a river of light moving through darkness, faces rising from its surface only to fade back under. She told him, "The universe remembers all its children, even the ones who forget where they came from." He wanted to move, to stand up, to leave, but the seat beneath him felt alive, holding him in place gently but firmly, like a parent steadying a frightened child. She reached out her hand again, and the moment her fingers hovered near his temple, he felt something stir inside him, a wave of recognition, mixed with fear, not of her but of himself. She whispered, "You have been away too long," and for a heartbeat, he could see what she saw, a flicker of endless sky filled with shifting lights, like creatures swimming through eternity, and a small part of him understood that he was not there. By accident, the light dimmed around them and the hum settled again, steady, calm, like a lullaby, and when he looked at her face once more, it seemed older somehow, filled with galaxies and sorrow. He had no words for. He sat there frozen as she smiled and said, "You are beginning to remember He sat still, afraid to breathe, afraid that even the sound of his own lungs might answer questions he did not want to understand. The mother moved around him, slowly like a moon circling a planet, her presence bending the air wherever she went, and his alien friend stayed near the wall, his outline flickering faintly as if he were caught between being there and being somewhere else. The silence in the room grew thick, heavy, alive, and beneath it he could hear something faint, almost like whispers layered over whispers, voices speaking in languages he could almost recognize, but not quite. They were not words, they were memories, made into sound. He tried to focus on one of them, but every time he got close it slid away, leaving behind an ache in his chest and a taste like metal. She said softly, "You hear them now, do you not?" He nodded without realizing he had nodded, and her eyes gleamed brighter for a moment. She said, "They have missed you. You have been gone longer than you think." And he wanted to ask who they were, what they meant by gone, but the questions stuck behind his teeth like stones. His alien friend finally turned around, his face calm but sad, and said, "She only wants to help you remember." He wanted to laugh, but no sound came out because the word remember had begun to sound dangerous now, like opening a door you could never close. She stepped closer and touched his shoulder, and suddenly he saw flashes behind his eyes, light streaking across a dark field, shapes that moved like thought, pure and unformed. The hum in the air grew louder, filling every space inside him until it felt like his bones were vibed in. He tried to pull away, but her hand was gentle and immovable like gravity itself. Her voice drifted through the noise, soft and clear, saying, "Do you remember the fall, the silence between stars, the place where breath becomes light?" And he almost said yes, though he did not know why. She smiled when he hesitated. Her smile carried sadness, or maybe pride. It was hard to tell the difference. Her face changed subtly for a moment, her features bending as though she was borrowing pieces of his memory to shape herself. He looked toward his alien friend for help, but his friend's form had begun to thin, light weaving through the skin like threads unraveling from a pattern that had finished its purpose. He whispered, "Please, what is happening?" But his voice came out quiet and strange, as though it was being translated through someone else's mouth. The mother said, "You are not only human, though you tried very hard to be. We let you rest among them until the time came to remember where you belong." Her words settled over him, heavy and beautiful. He felt the room moving again, pulsing like a living heart, and in that motion he sensed something pulling at him from beneath the surface of his skin, as if another version of himself was trying to wake. He wanted to run, but his body refused. The air around him thickened, the glowing faintly silver. He felt tears sting his eyes, though he was not sure if they were his or hers. She leaned closer, her breath cool against his ear, and whispered, "You were one of us before the forgetting." The hum stopped suddenly, leaving silence so deep it rang, and in that stillness he felt everything shift. The walls, the light, his heartbeat, and the way the world held him. It was all different, as if reality itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. The mother gestured toward the far end of the room, and the walls opened like petals, unfolding to reveal another space, wider, softer, filled with a golden haze that shimmered as if the air itself were made of quiet thought. A table waited in the center, low and long, carved from something that looked like glass and water mixed together, bending light in slow ripples. The surface reflected not the ceiling above, but a dark, endless sky scattered with stars that seemed to move when he looked at them. Toulon, she smiled and said, "Come eat," and the sound of her voice made the table pulse gently, as though it had been waiting for the command. He hesitated, but his feet moved forward on their own, his alien friend walking beside him, silent and pale, their shape flickering faintly at the edges again, like they were half made of memory. When they reached the table, the mother raised her hand and the light shifted. The surface blossomed with color plates forming from the glass like growing flowers, each one holding something that looked almost like food, but not quite, shapes that resembled fruit but breathed slightly, dishes that shimmered with warmth though no steam rose from them. He sat slowly, the chair rising from the floor once more, molding perfectly to his shape as if it already knew him. She said, "Eat," and he wanted to refuse to ask what it was, but his hands had already moved, the fork gleaming faintly as though alive. The moment it touched the food, the surface rippled, bending color around the metal. The fork hummed softly, a note that matched the pulse of the house. He took a bite out of instinct, the taste's impossible to name, not sweet, not bitter, not anything he had words for. It filled his mouth with warmth that spread behind his eyes into his head until he felt like he could see sound and taste light. His alien friend ate quietly across from him, their movements slow, deliberate, and for a moment he thought he saw their reflection in the table, but it was not quite the same. The reflection smiled a second later, as if time ran differently. There, the Mother watched him with quiet delight, her eyes glowing softer now as if she were proud of something unseen. She said, "You remember through the body sometimes, Taze opens doors," and as she spoke he felt a rush of memory, though it did not belong to any life he knew. Endless night, an ocean of stars, moving like living fire, a soundless wind carrying whispers in a language of light. He dropped the fork, startled, but it hovered above the table, spinning slowly on its own before settling again. She told him to breathe, to let it come back, to let the body remember what the mind forgot. He obeyed without thinking, the room tilting slightly as if gravity had lost interest in consistency, colors folded in on themselves, the walls bending in rhythm with his breath. His alien friend reached out, placing a hand on his arm. There, touch steady, grounding, and said quietly, "Do not be afraid. She does not take, she only gives." He looked at the mother again, and she was smiling with her hands folded gracefully in front of her, but now her skin shimmered faintly, translucent, and beneath it he saw movement, flowing like starlight through veins that were not veins, like constellations alive inside her. He blinked, and for a heartbeat he saw his own reflection, there mirrored in her glow, flickering, uncertain, as if the border between them had begun to thin, and he wondered if maybe the meal was not meant to feed him, but to remind him what he truly was becoming. The mother leaned back in her seat, though there was no movement to show where the chair ended or where she began. Her form seemed part of the room, part of the golden air that surrounded them. Her eyes glowed softly, shifting in rhythm with the light. She said, "Tell me a story from before you knew him," and her voice made the edges of his thoughts ripple. He wanted to ask which story, but the question never left his tongue. Words were already spilling out, uninvited pieces of memory folding over one another. He spoke of the first night he met her, son of the storm that never reached the ground, and the way lightning had hung in the clouds like frozen veins of light. He described the silence that followed the world, holding its breath just before the rain that never came. As he spoke, her eyes changed color again, soft green at first, then deep violet, then something brighter, something he could not name, a color that seemed to exist only while she looked at him. Her gaze deepened as if drawing the memory out through his skin, and for a moment he felt hollow, emptied, in a way that was not painful but terrifyingly calm. She whispered, "Keep going," and the sound carried a weight that pressed against his chest. He told her of a dream he had as a child, standing on the shore of an ocean that reflected stars instead of moonlight, the waves whispering words he could never remember. Upon waking, she smiled knowingly and said, "You were closer." Then closer to the remembering in her tone made him shiver. He wanted to ask what remembering meant, but she had already begun to hum softly, the same low rhythm that filled the walls, the sound weaving through his bones. The air thickened again, the table fading around the edges as though the room itself was turning to liquid. He blinked and saw shapes drifting in the light, faint silhouettes moving through layers of memory, faces, or maybe thoughts of faces, reaching toward him only to dissolve. When he tried to focus, the mother said gently, "We live in stories. You tell them, so you can find the shape of yourself, but you forget that the story also listens back." And he felt a strange pull in his chest, a recognition that felt too vast to belong to one life. His alien friend had not moved, still watching him quietly, but there was something in their eyes now, something that looked like sorrow, maybe pride, maybe both. They said, "She sees who you are and who you were and who you could still be." Their voice soft, like light passing through water, and the words sank into him like warmth spreading through coalskin. Mother rose from her seat, gliding rather than walking, the light bending around her shape as she circled the table, her eyes flickering faster now, the colors flashing with every breath he took. Each story he told, changing the hue as if her vision was woven from memory itself. She paused beside him, resting her hand lightly on his shoulder, and he felt the pulse again, not from the house, but from her and from himself, the same rhythm echoing between them. Her voice slipped into his thoughts, a whisper both inside and outside, saying, "You see, we are not strangers, we never were here." Looked up at her, unable to speak, unable to move as the air around them shimmered the walls, breathing slow and deep as if the entire house waited for what came next. And in that waiting silence he realized that something vast and endless had begun to wake inside him. The air began to cool, as though the room itself was exhaling. After holding its breath too long, the walls softened, their glow fading from gold to pale blue, until the colors were nearly gone. His alien friend stood and nodded toward the open doorway that had not been there before. Light spilled from its soft silver, bending gently across the floor. The mother smiled, that same quiet smile, the one that looked kind and endless, and said, "It is time to go." Her voice was calm but carried something deeper Beneath it, like sorrow wrapped in peace, he rose slowly, the chair dissolving the moment. He stood, his body felt light and heavy at once, as if part of him had already started to drift away. He followed his friend through the doorway, the hum of the house fading behind him, though he could still feel it in his bones, faint and steady like a memory that would never leave. The hallway stretched out before them, longer than he remembered, though it pulsed with gentle light. This time no breathing, no whispering, just stillness, alive and patient. The air shimmered with shapes that almost looked like faces but vanished when he blinked. He wanted to speak, to ask what would happen now, but his alien friend only looked ahead, their steps silent, their outline flickering softly. The front door appeared at last, framed in that soft silver glow. He could see the night beyond, deep and open, stars hanging lower than they should. The mother's voice reached him again, though she did not follow it. Sounded both far away and right beside his ear. She said, "You will forget some of this, but not all forgetting keeps you anchored. Remembering keeps you real." He touched the doorknob and it felt warm, alive, pulsing faintly in time with his heartbeat. He turned it slowly, and the night breathed out to greet him, cool, clean, smelling of rain that had not fallen yet. He stepped outside, and for a moment everything looked normal. The street, the faint glow of the distant city, the outline of trees leaning against the wind, but the world felt too quiet, too sharp, as though the edges had been redrawn. His alien friend stepped out behind him, smiling faintly, softer than before, and said, "You will dream differently now. You will see them even when you do. Now look." And he wanted to ask who them was, but the words slipped away, carried off by the windy. Turned to glance back at the house, but it no longer looked the same. The walls seemed smaller, dimmer, ordinary, and yet, when he focused, he saw something move behind the window, a shimmer like a reflection, waving slowly. He raised his hand, and for a heartbeat, he saw her standing there, the mother's face calm, her eyes reflecting the stars above him, though she was still inside, and he realized with a quiet certainty that the reflection in the glass was smiling a moment later than he did. The night pressed close, the stars to bright the sky. Almost trembling, he walked down the path, each step lighter than the last, though the hum stayed with him, faint in his chest like a heartbeat not entirely his own. At the end of the street he turned once more, but the house was gone, nothing there but darkness and a silence that felt full instead of empty. He breathed in the cool air, and for a moment thought he heard her voice again, soft and distant, saying, "We never really say goodbye. We only changed the shape of staying." And as the sound faded, he felt both whole and incomplete, as though something had followed him home.